It's time now for some political analysis. Adam Entis writes for The New Yorker and is a brand new CBS News contributor. Welcome.
Thank you.
Julie Pace is the Washington bureau chief at the Associated Press. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is also with us, along with Josh Holmes, a Republican consultant and former chief of staff to Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. Josh, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I want to ask you, you just heard Neil Katyal decide or describe what a Senate trial could look like if the House goes ahead with impeaching the president. Does your version of what it looks like match his?
No, well, there are a couple of details that are probably worth going over. The first is it's going to take 51 votes in terms of calling witnesses. I think Neil suggested that basically the President of the United States could be called or subpoenaed to testify with a Democratic wish list, apparently. Unfortunately, that would take 51 votes from Republicans to try to provide that, and that's obviously not going to happen.
So when he's saying subpoena power there, and you could see cabinet members come and answer questions.
You could see all kinds of different things. I think the most important thing to focus on there is that the president is going to have his first capacity for an official defense in the Senate. And what that is basically a witness list of their choosing that they will come to the Senate with, discuss both the contours and the length of how that trial is going to work, and try to get Republican buy-in and hopefully bipartisan buy-in to process all of this. But the idea that you can just sort of pull down whomever you want from a Democratic point of view to come testify before the Senate is not true.
Well, one of the witnesses that you hear the White House and you hear Republicans say they want to hear from is Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, the current candidate. I want to play a soundbite of Joe Biden on the campaign trail this week where he seemed to be punching back a bit.
But you, on the other hand, sent your son over there to get a job and work for a gas company that he had no experience with gas or nothing, in order to get access for the president. So you're selling access to the president just like he was. So
You're a damn liar, man. That's not true. And no one has ever said that.
I didn't say you were doing anything wrong.
You said I set up my son to work in an oil company. Isn't that what you said? Get your words straight, Jack.
Get your words straight, Jack. You don't often hear Joe Biden hit back like that. Is this a tactic? Is this an honest moment?
I think it is an honest moment. I mean, I think this is the rawest issue for him, anything that has to do with his son. You know, the time when his son joined that board, Burisma, the company in Ukraine, his other son, Bo, was, you know, a year away from dying. And it was just a very painful moment for the family. And, you know, the policy that Joe Biden had with his son was kind of a don't ask, don't tell. Hunter wouldn't talk to his dad about his business activities, and his father wouldn't ask. And so to have his son dragged into this is very hard for him because it wouldn't be happening if his father wasn't running for president. And he knows also where his son is. I mean, I'm not even sure exactly how sober he is. At times, he's struggled for years with his addictions, and his dad knows that. And during that period of time, he was in a very bad place.
And you spent a lot of time with Hunter. You've written about him. And I know you've said it's also painful because it was Bo, the son who passed, who was the one who reined in Hunter from some of his worst instincts, and he's not there.
Right. So whenever Hunter started drinking again, it was Bo that would take him to the airport so he could then fly to get treatment. Right. It was always Bo who was the one trying to save him. And when during this last year of life, Hunter was just a wreck, which is when this is all going on. And so we saw in the impeachment hearing, one State Department official testified that he had concerns and he had raised it with members of Biden's staff and was told that Biden didn't have the bandwidth at that time to deal with it because he was still dealing with the death of Bo. And so this has been consistent in Joe Biden's life. Anything that has to do with his family, anything that, particularly since Bo died, that has to do with Hunter is incredibly sensitive for him, which is the reason why actually it's an effective issue for Republicans to push on, but it's also, it's something that maybe people watch and they can realize, well, this is a guy who actually really does care about his kids.
But the chances, Ed, of Joe or Hunter Biden coming and testifying.
Well,
in the
once
Senate
again, you need
trial.
51 senators
Right.
to agree to do that.
And a lot of them don't want to do that to a
Exactly.
former colleague
Exactly.
of theirs.
And we've heard from enough Republicans, or enough of them have inferred that that might be a bridge too far. Certainly other people involved, they would probably be fair game, but the Bidens less so. And from a raw political standpoint, his aides this week thought this was a fantastic moment for him because it showed fire in the belly. It gave voters a sense of how he would respond to this if he was asked about the situation by either an opponent or by President Trump. Clearly, others thought this looked a little weird because in that exchange at one point, it sounded like he called the man fat instead of Jack. You can listen to it yourself and decide. And there were some other missteps and misspoken words over the course of this 19-stop bus tour that he made, but it was called no malarkey, and in that moment, he certainly didn't want to take any of it. And his aides think that it could help prove to voters if you've got concerns about how he'll handle it, that's how he'll handle it.
How he would handle a debate stage moment against President Trump. Julie, you saw Kamala Harris step out of the race this week. Is she a candidate to now be the VP on the Biden ticket if he gets the nomination?
I think she certainly would have to be, not just for Joe Biden, but for any Democratic nominee. Kamala Harris has a really interesting background, certainly her profile as the highest profile Black female politician in the country right now. I do think one dynamic, though, between Biden and Harris to watch for is that dynamic from that first debate. Joe Biden took that moment incredibly personally when Kamala Harris opened up her remarks by saying, "I don't think you're a racist, but." And part of the reason, actually, to get back to what we were talking about, is that Kamala Harris and Beau Biden were very close when they were both attorneys generals for Delaware and California. Politics is politics. If he is the nominee and he thinks that Kamala Harris can help him win the presidency, you can put a lot of hard feelings aside, but that certainly was a moment that really stuck with him for quite some time.
And Josh, when Senator Harris stepped back this week, her retort to the president was, "I'll see you at your trial, sir." Reminding everyone that she's a prosecutor and now she will be there for that trial. How much of the 2020 campaign time schedule is actually factoring into Republican planning?
Yeah, well, she'll have no more or less role than any other senator in the body. And I think that underscores another challenge that a lot of these Democratic 2020 candidates have here. There are not as many senators as there were at the beginning, but there still are a few, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and others. So the way you look at it is that they're going to have a closing argument going into the Iowa caucuses is largely spent in Washington, D.C. talking about the impeachment trial of President Trump. So a former campaign manager, I can't imagine trying to manage a closing message to voters that you can't control at all. And being in Iowa.
And that might maybe factor into some thinking in Republican leadership. We could see not just the month of January, but I mean, how long is this going to last?
Well, you never know. I mean, the contours, again, are going to have to be set with 51 votes. And I think the one thing that Senate Republican leadership is absolutely committed on doing, and you saw Pat Cipollone and others come up to the Hill and talk to Republican senators about this, is that they want a full trial. They want the president and his team to be able to provide a full witness list, that they have the first kind of access to the American people to push back on the charges that Adam Schiff and others have brought. So that could take a while. But again, I think a lot of that is going to be determined by what the specific articles say. And
Yeah.
I didn't hear that from Mr. Schiff this morning.
Well, we might know more by the end of this week. We'll take a quick break here, but I want to come back with more on the White House strategy. And a lot happened this week, as always. But we'll be right back with more from our panel. And we're back now with our political panel. I want to button up a few things on impeachment. Julie, you heard President Trump, while he was overseas, politics no longer stopping at the water's edge, unload on Adam Schiff. I mean, he called him a deranged human being, a maniac, a very sick man. This is someone who's trying to impeach him and in the process of writing the articles against him. What is the White House strategy here?
I think the White House strategy is to very quickly get through this House process and move on to the Senate. They have basically accepted the fact that the president is going to be impeached. They want to move on to the Senate, but I do think that there is a little clarity that needs to be brought to some of the White House officials about what this process actually looks like. I mean, Josh was making this point. This is not a situation where the Republican senators are going to be out there on the Senate floor actively able to defend the president. This is going to be a process that's run by managers, that has witnesses come forward. So it's a little bit different than I think what the president has in mind right now. But certainly they think that this is a better forum for them. They think this is an opportunity to go on the offensive and bring forward people who might add to the picture that the president wants to paint, which is of a Democratic administration under a Vice President Joe Biden who was engaged in corruption, which is unproven. So I do think it's a pretty high bar if you're the White House to try to push in that direction, given the real lack of evidence that there is to bolster that case.
So this isn't going to look like your average courtroom drama.
This is not going to look like your average courtroom
Right.
drama.
Adam, Rudy Giuliani, the word bold, the word brazen has been used when I was talking to Republicans about this decision of him to go to Ukraine this week and to meet with individuals who are part of this entire impeachment proceeding. Is there a strategy there? Mark Meadows on this program was saying he would look at the information that Rudy Giuliani brings back. Is that actually going to be introduced?
Yeah, I don't really know what the plan is for that. I mean, I did talk to somebody who traveled with Giuliani on the trip, and so originally he was going to Budapest to see Lutsenko, the former prosecutor general. And then as a last minute, they made a decision to go to see Shokin, his predecessor, the former prosecutor general who was allegedly fired by Biden, allegedly again to protect his son. His strategy is clearly just to kind of keep keep fanning the flames of a innuendo, half-truths, rumint. That these Ukrainians are giving him. I spent a lot of time there with some of these characters, they've pretty bluntly told me that, they are just feeding Giuliani, in many cases, what he wants to hear. Mm-hmm. Giuliani is very eager to accept this information that he's getting. He doesn't question it. He's just trying to put it out there, hoping that some of it will stick. This is not that different from what was contained in the dossier that he provided to Pompeo at the State Department back in, I think it was April or May.
That ended up with the Inspector General.
Correct, mm-hmm. Which, if you go through it carefully, you realize it's just a lot of innuendo, assumptions, false information. I mean, there's some things in there that are true, but most of it is not accurate.
I want to ask you, Ed, about a key interview this week. Our own Gayle King sat down with Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, for his first interview since he declared that he was going to run. What did you make of some of his give and take with her?
Two things stuck out. The one that he got a lot of guff for right at the beginning was that he was asked about comments that Cory Booker had made about the increasing lack of diversity now at the top tier of the Democratic race, and Bloomberg sort of brushed it off and said, well, he supported me once, he sat on my board, he's well-spoken, and those are buzzwords for Black and Latino candidates, minorities all across the country who've heard too much of that. Booker called him out for it, Bloomberg apologized. The more effective answer he had, though, was to the question about the fact that he's entering this race and basically bankrolling it on his own. And he reiterated an argument he made when he ran for mayor, which is, I'm paying for this on my own, I won't accept a salary, therefore I can't be bought. Everyone else is doing the same thing, but they're asking other people for money, and they'll owe somebody a favor at some point. With me, you don't have that. You know who else made that argument? Donald Trump. And guess what? It worked. And who's Mike Bloomberg trying to win over? The same kind of people who may go back and forth between both parties, who probably voted for Donald Trump. He's unloading $60 million in TV and radio so far, about $5 million across digital platforms. If you're an American with a TV or a phone, you have probably come across this now in the last week, and it will continue to happen. And we will see, probably right after the holidays, whether it's sticking or whether he's struggling.
What do you think his chances are of winning over some of the Republicans Ed just talked about?
Well, no, look, I think you're only buying something if you get a product in the end. And I haven't seen any evidence that voters at this point have gravitated towards Bloomberg and away from some of his Democratic primary rivals. But the idea that he's gravitating, that any sort of voter in the center that has a right-of-center view is gravitating towards Bloomberg, I think is way far afield. At this point, the issues that define Michael Bloomberg and his post-mayoral sort of activism category are all exclusively not only left of center, but are almost litmus tests in the conservative electorate. But gun control, banning soda, getting rid of coal, energy stances, all.
He was a Republican at one point.
Right, and it's pretty hard to make that case now. And I think voters are going to look at that in the context of a Democratic primary. And again, it's going to be very, very difficult for somebody like Michael Bloomberg to say he's an actual centrist.
That's brokered convention you hear rumored again and again. Julie, what about the point Cory Booker made on race this week? He said for Kamala Harris that, the Democratic Party essentially takes black women for granted in terms of voting. What's going to happen with Biden and his ability to court the vote that Cory Booker says isn't showing up?
Democrats are in this really interesting position right now because you have a Democratic electorate that is incredibly diverse, and we have seen in election after election the power in particular of black women. They have really delivered elections for Democrats over and over again. I do think the party is recognizing that. I don't think they are being taken for granted. But we've had this historically diverse Democratic field that is now at a point where the top frontrunners, every candidate that has qualified for the next debate is white. Cory Booker is trying to argue that the Democratic Party shouldn't stand for that the rules are brokered against them right now, but that is the reality of where we are.
We'll be right back.